This episode is sponsored by ShoutOUT, a two-way text messaging and campaign management platform that provides analytics and facilitates conversational messaging that delivers, engages, and converts more. Send personalized campaigns from unique phone numbers to the message content itself, letting you brand your campaign to promote yourself and create your messages in a way that users are made to think you sent it personally for them. You can then monitor and improve your campaigns over time with real-time analytics. Start reducing messaging and campaign costs with cost-effective bulk SMS. Scale efficiently without having to worry about high costs. If you'd like to start using mass texting services with simple packages to choose from, visit getshoutout.com today. Hello, everyone. This is your host, Akil Jabbar, and welcome back to another episode of SaaS District. In today's episode, we'll be talking about best practices for effectively managing remote development teams. Today, we have our guest, Victor Purolnik, joining us. Victor is the founder and CEO of Trustshoring, a company that can help you find the right software development resources to support your growth by linking you with the professional and skilled developers that fit your company culture. He's an expert in software development and the outsourcing industry with around 10 years of experience as both provider and client. He's also the author of Complete Outsourcing Playbook and the organizer of many events in startups and the outsourcing space. And recently, he's joined a Berlin-based startup called Rebolet as their interim CTO. So welcome, Victor. Super excited to have you on the SaaS District show today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm looking forward.
So I want to start off with, kind of what you do and your background and, what your business is all about. Because on your website says, kickstart your business growth with our no-fee services and get connected with your perfect software development partners within 72 hours. So great copy. But that's also a very bold claim. 72 hours to find your perfect software developer. How do you do it without making money? So tell me, how does that work? What is the process? And how do you guys make money in this thing?
we obviously do make money. So that's not a fact that we hide, and it would be hard not to, right? Obviously, as a business. So maybe about myself and why I even run this and how I even do this. So I am actually a developer. I studied computer science and engineering management and worked at a few startups. The interim CTO that you mentioned, as it says, interim is actually currently handing it over to the right CTO because I'm running a business. So I don't really have time for that. But that's kind of my developer side. And I moved through product management and things like that fairly quickly. I was interested in also the UX side of things, like really about product in general. But also, I'm German, but my roots are also in Eastern Europe. And so at some point I decided, it was very early. Like that's really the early days of working with remote developers when people were still asking me where Ukraine even is on the map, right? Today, you don't even get that question. But back in the days, I co-founded a software house in Ukraine with a co-founder. We grew that to about 70 people. I exited it. And that's when I started this company, Trustshoring, from my experience in working both within startups, but also on the ground in Eastern Europe. That what we do essentially is we advise startup founders on the right approach to remote software development. We try to be the objective partner who tells you you should work with a software house, or you should hire developers directly, or something between, or should you bring in freelancers for something, for design, or do you maybe need a product manager? We answer questions like that without you going to a software house directly and they're just selling you what they do. But then, of course, we if people want and ask for that, and that is kind of obviously our end goal, we then match startups up with the right provider from our network. These are people that we've been working for a very long time. We visited them. We've done a lot of projects with them. And so that's who we match them up with. And, you said, no fees. How do you make your money? So we obviously do charge somewhere, and we get like finder's fees, kickbacks from the various providers that we match people to. kind of like a real estate broker or a financial broker or something like that. It's a similar model, but the client doesn't pay us directly, and also and especially not for just speaking to us and not for the consulting part. So essentially, there's no risk in speaking to us and checking us out.
Yeah, makes sense. And at the end of the day, they still get to make their decision, right? It's not like you give them options and then they can decide. And if they like what you bring, which obviously you guys have done a lot of vetting and work to bring these high quality folks, which is not easy to find, then it makes sense for the work you guys have done.
Absolutely, yeah.
So maybe as a SaaS founder, right, who may have a CTO or they're not technical, right? At what stage should they be thinking about, offshoring the technical team versus hiring in-house, which you talked about? What are the stages you've seen typically that they come to you and say, like, what should I do? What should I do? And you look at it and say, okay, you're at this stage, this is where you do it. And then when you move to this stage, you should now look at hiring in-house.
That's a great question. You can look at that from several ways. I don't think there's a particular stage at which it makes more or less sense. What changes at each different stage is how you work in-house or remotely. A lot of times people start MVPs. It really depends on your entire context, and that's how we go very deeply through the entire setup of a company. But generally speaking, it happens a lot of times, and this is not a bad approach. This is actually a good approach. It happens that someone tries to build a very cheap MVP on a budget, right? Because you need to validate things. You need to get somewhere. You need to de-risk your project, essentially, right? Your company, your idea, validate your hypothesis. So obviously, a lot of people do that, and at some point, they gain traction. They validate some of these hypotheses. They have more and more users. They need to add more features. They're closer to product market fit. And at that point, they realize they need to level up kind of their software development skills. And that's usually when people try to figure out, should we now pull things in-house, or should we keep things remotely? Should we use a different agency? Should we now hire a CTO or get a co-founder? And these are the really interesting questions at that point. That's actually an interesting question. Should I get a co-founder or should I get a CTO? It depends on what you're building, but unless you're building like what we try to call rocket science for non-technical people, latest technology, more research than development, right? Maybe machine learning or just complex technology. Then yes, you kind of have to, because you need to have someone who really knows what they're doing. But most SaaS businesses are actually fairly simple. Like, this is bread and butter software. This is not rocket science. So the question really is, should you, just for the sake of getting a technical co-founder or a CTO, should you really give up shares, pay a large chunk of your available budget or runway to that person if it's questionable whether they'll actually make that much of a difference? You can get, because what you get from that person, you get technical oversight, you get help with making technical decisions, and that kind of stuff. But that you can get from like a partial consultant as well, or, and I'm just going to make that claim here, if you actually work with a good software house, they usually bring that knowledge with them. But then again, of course, if you want the accountability part, right, and that makes sense, of course, then there are fractional CTOs around as well. And I do believe it, especially since that tech leader is a different person at each stage, right? Initially, when you're building the MVP, most people really just, they hire a developer, any developer that wants to work with them, really. And they call him CTO oftentimes, or co-founder and whatnot. And then, 6 months down the road, they turn out to be the wrong person to continue, because at first you need a pragmatic developer that understands your business case and just builds anything quickly to validate. Next up, you need someone with a lot of software development experience to build up a team, to set up a process, and to just make sure that things are scalable. And then at the latest stage, the CTO really is more of a C-level person that's hiring, that's making sure that the structure is there, and that's also involved in investor meetings and things like that. And if you give away your shares, like substantial amount of shares to the first person in the beginning, that is kind of unfortunate, and I've seen it a lot of times.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, other benefit of having a CTO, right? I mean, a huge benefit is they're vested in your company if they're the right fit. Yeah. So obviously, right now, you want to maybe set up a vesting schedule. You don't give them shares up front. But, even when you go to raise money, or let's say the shop you're working with, that person leaves, or, that interim CTO, whatever happens, right? The company leaves or whatever, they shut down. Now you're kind of off the hook, and like you're kind of stuck with, having to start all over and find somebody in the middle of a project. I think is a lot more challenging, right?
Totally.
And if I'm looking to hire teams, developers, development houses, you're well connected in Eastern Europe, but I also hear a lot of engineers or founders that come to us and say, hey, we're looking at India, Brazil, or Argentina, or other places in the world where typically they'll promise a lot lower cost dev teams. Why should they consider the pros and cons of both? And what have you seen? I mean, personally, I've seen great work out of Eastern Europe, so I'm biased there. But what's your thinking around that?
Well, I'm obviously biased too, right? And I'll be very honest here. I have very little personal experience with India and absolutely none with Latin America. I don't think Eastern Europe is better per se or better at all. People come to us in Eastern Europe. What they say is they're coming for the experience, both technically and culturally. In our target audience, they just seem to be a really good fit. The outsourcing market is very, very mature in Eastern Europe, or the funny thing is, right, you used to call it outsourcing, and now everybody just calls it remote work. Contractually, it's still subcontracting. It's still the same. It's still sure. Whether you hire someone directly as a freelancer or it goes through a software house, now it's called remote work. And but people in Eastern Europe are very used to that kind of work. Like they've been doing it for 10, almost 20 years. They have great English, mostly. And the technical education and the process education. They've gone through big software houses that worked for the enterprise, through software houses that you started working with startups more recently. And then really since COVID, what started is people break out of these structures and really start working for startups directly more than before. And that's a reason why people come to Eastern Europe, but I don't think that's the only place where you can find great developers.
Oh, good answer. What are some, if I'm looking to hire, remote tech team, especially as a non-technical founder, right? Sometimes you just don't have that, the right questions to ask, because that's going to reveal a lot of things. Do you have any favorite questions you like to ask, or whether it's technical or other things that maybe I should think about when looking to make that hire?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it may be challenging to really vet the team as a non-technical founder, but there's a few great things you can ask, even being non-technical. Obviously, first step, look at the portfolio, kind of obvious. You see if you like what they're doing or if you don't like it. The problem with that a bit is that a lot of times they're not the ones who created the design, and that's what you see on the portfolio. So that either in a good or in a bad way, right? It could be that the crappy thing they didn't design is not their fault, just as well as the great looking thing is not what they designed. But what you should really do is, from the portfolio, you can understand if the projects are generally something similar and not necessarily the same vertical, but like complexity wise, and that's something you judge from the portfolio. It's kind of the first step. Then you should try to understand if you click with the people, right? Speak with the entire team. Do they understand what you're doing? The team experience. You do have that feeling from them. And then once you have either a short list or you're pretty sure that someone is a good fit, the ultimate test for me is to try out software that they've built, but not any software, not the one from the portfolio. Ask them for a complex project that they developed over ideally at least 2 years, one minimum, with 2 years or more that has a lot of users. A lot is relative, for some platforms, 100 users is a lot. For others, it could be tens of thousands, but generally a complex project that is successful, that has a load on it, and that most definitely has been continuously developed for quite a while. Because it's very easy to build something within a couple of months that's well defined and that works. That's actually very easy. Anyone can do that, any software developer. Now, the tricky part, and that's how you understand if they write good code or not. Because writing good code is not just something that you do to please the developer, right? You do that as well, and it's important, kind of. But what it gives you is scalability and its extendability. When you see projects breaking apart is after a few months, is when you try to add new features and everything is just breaking apart. That's when you have a bad code base. And so now ask them to connect you with that client, to speak to them, and ask that client how it is right now to work with that team. How is adding new features? Are there a lot of bugs? Is stuff just randomly breaking in other places of the system? Things like that. And that really is an indicator. That is the indicator of whether they're able to build scalable software, which means they're writing good code. And I think this is as good as you can get being a non-technical founder. You won't actually get more granular. If you look at the code base, right, as a developer and you vet it, essentially, if that's good code, that's what the end result should be like.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. So the quality of the code, unless you know what spaghetti code looks like, or you can hire somebody to do a kind of an audit for you and have a look at it. But I think that's very smart, right? Talking to the client and seeing, okay, look, is this a robust code, and are you happy with the work and what they've built and how easy has it been? I think that's probably the best way that's a smart way to look at it.
Because you can write spaghetti code and have a working product that actually works great, but it will fall apart after this 10th iteration of adding things. That's when it'll definitely fall apart, and that's what you want to understand.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just a lot more expensive to have to rebuild at that point, right? Yeah. And then when I'm thinking about hiring developers, right, there's the options. Okay, like you mentioned, remote developers, or you have the option of hiring locally, right? If I'm in the US, I'm going to hire somebody maybe in my region. At the office or not, but just somebody who you're familiar with. What have you seen as kind of the pros and cons and kind of the current state of market? Obviously, there's one is availability, like there's high demand for developers anywhere in the world, and then secondly is what are expected rates and salaries right now for software developers in 2022? Obviously there's a difference between junior and senior. What can they expect to pay?
That's a great question, and so when it comes to hiring remotely versus locally, especially in-house, what I used to say is, I get it. Everybody's kind of trying to build these in-house teams with like the foosball tables and everything, and you have your veggie Fridays, whatnot. And I get it that this is obviously this has a lot of upsides, and if you take your ideal in-house team, your imagined ideal in-house team, because that is the key question here. If you imagine your dream in-house team, probably nothing can beat it. But the question is, can you assemble it? And how fast? And what does that do to your runway? Because if the answer is that a team 80, 90% as efficient, and that more goes into remote working culture and everything. I don't want to argue about whether in-house or remote first is actually more productive or what's better for people. But generally, I used to say that, if you can get that right now, isn't that actually a better solution? Got to be a bit pragmatic also. So I used to say that, but now since COVID, really, a lot more people have gone remote first anyway, and now it's just a matter of what time zone difference starts becoming too much, which obviously brings its own challenges, and the ability to meet up as often as possible is, of course, extremely, extremely important. And this is actually something that people kind of, if they hire a remote team like their own team, it's obvious you're going to meet up. But if they hire an agency, sometimes people work with them for years and never meet up. And for me, I don't get it, because if you treat these people like in-house, you have a dedicated team with that agency, right? They've been working for one-on-one personally. If you treat them like in-house people, which you totally can, even if they're through an agency, they will suddenly become part of your team mentally. And this is amazing. And you meet up with them. And this is, I keep telling this to our clients. And every single time somebody actually books that flight and flies over and comes back after 2-3 weeks, you're like, wow, this is just incredible. Like, the work now is just so much better. It's
Right.
it's like if I had an in-house team. Like, yeah, that's exactly what you do. Now, when it comes to salaries, unfortunately, there's no such thing as cheap software development anymore. Like, there are relatively cheapish rates. Obviously, nothing compares to San Francisco. But generally speaking, especially when it comes to senior talent, the world is getting more and more flat, right? So we expect that to continue in 2022. So remote developer salaries will keep increasing. And I mean, it really is at an extreme where software developers in some countries make 10 to 20 times the average salary, just because of that fact. And that's something we do have to live with. The benefit of going remote is simply that we have access to talent. We have access to a lot of talent, a lot of great people that we might not have been able to access previously. And yes, they might actually be a bit cheaper. You might actually be able to work more flexibly and things like that. So there's still a lot of benefits, but the days of I'm going to get a senior developer for $3,000 a month full time, they're just completely over. Unfortunately, they're probably not going to come back. But what really impacts the price, unfortunately, or as in every single trade or professionals like that, if you know exactly what you're doing, right, then you can work, then you understand how to save money. Say if you're building a house, if you're an architect, then you know exactly how to choose the right materials, how to choose the cheapest contractors, not going through a general contractor, hiring everybody yourself, managing them, making sure everything on the invoice is correct, whatnot. You can save a lot of money. But what a lot of people do in software development, which you probably wouldn't do when you're building a house, is buying the cheapest materials online you can just possibly find, hiring people from high school and telling them, here are your bricks, go build. And obviously that is a bad idea. Or it's a great idea for building a prototype where you just want to invite your family, show them around and say, this would be your room once we rebuild it. Please don't lean against the wall. Which is what we actually do in software development, right? We build these prototypes. But you always have to understand that this is a prototype that you've built this way, and that once you scale, this will become a problem.
And just kind of on your point of meeting your agency, people who work with you, and you said there goes years without ever seeing them in person. Do you ever suggest from the founding or the core company, so you mentioned going to meet with the agency, or the agency people actually going out and meeting with the flying out and meeting with the team? What have you seen?
Both,
Both?
totally. Because it's a great experience for either of them. It's amazing to fly out some of the team to say Eastern Europe if that's where your team's located. Getting to know the culture, the food, visiting. Honestly, it's a great way to expense a trip there, right? So why not do it? And vice versa. Get people in, meet the entire company, maybe even meet a client or two to understand them better, right? This is really, really super valuable both ways.
Nice. So if I'm just starting off, like I get this question from early people who are looking to get into SaaS. They say, look, I want to build my SaaS product, build version 1 of my product, maybe not prototype, but like you said here, I don't know anything. I can't manage it. I'm not an architect, but build my house, build my B2B SaaS product. And like you said, quite simple these days, nothing too complex. How much can I expect for, let's say, initial development costs for starting my business, right? To go out there and look, hey, I've got this working product. I can go out and try to sell it now because maybe I'm good at sales.
Yeah, totally. So the simple answer is it's impossible to say because again, it does depend on there's enough people who do want to build something complex sometimes without knowing it, and that really makes it more difficult. Complexity comes in two flavors: either technical difficulty, like we're trying to build something new, we're trying to involve latest technology, or we're just trying to use a lot of APIs, and APIs just tend to be unpredictable. And we need to safeguard against that, and that's a lot of work. Or it's just the size. Someone comes with 800 screens, and it can be just form fields. It can be super simple. It's a lot of work. The next one is scalability, and that's a huge factor. This is where we want to say, is this the cardboard house that we're just going to show to people, or is this an actual house we're going to live in, or is this like the foundation for a skyscraper, the first floor, but we do want to build like 99 floors on top of that? In that case, we also have to handle things differently, right? And because people come to me and they say, look, I have one form field and a button. How hard can it be? Like, yeah, it depends on your scalability. Google is one form field and a button. It has a gazillion of engineers working on it. So that's kind of what you need to know, what the load on this thing will be and how you're planning it. Because that can 10x, 20x, 30x your development costs without having anything change for the user on the front end. And so how much you have prepared and how much you understand what you're building is also a very big factor. Because if sometimes we have very professional product managers coming to us and they have, or their wireframes, their user stories, their flow charts, their customer journeys, their, everything prepared, right? And the developer just has to read that late at night and break it down and estimate it. And that's cool. That's perfect. But if you don't have that, it's not a problem, but you need to do what we usually recommend, a discovery phase where you produce all of these materials, because that's how you de-risk the product. You don't want to start with development not knowing exactly what you're building, at least for phase one. Of course, then if we're building an MVP, we do have a more or less defined product that we can scope down. Then we iterate, we add on, we go more into agile. But at first, we kind of need to get this thing built, and we need to understand what we're building. And, these discovery phases, depending on the complexity of the product, can easily cost 5 to 20K, roughly. And so whether you have that expense or not makes a big difference in your budget. And then I would maybe try the other approach of like, how much should an MVP cost? How much should I invest without further de-risking my product? And here we see most people want to invest between 20 and 100K at first to build a product, and then either raise funding or pour more cash in, or however they want to continue building this. And the question here now becomes, so what can I do with that money? Right? And actually knowing that number, and that's why we also ask for it, is how we can determine the right solution. Right? If the number is way too low, then I will say, okay, you should probably look at building a manual Zapier MVP or something. Try to de-risk that more outside of code. And so that's really important to understand, because this depends on what tools can we use to build your MVP. What's the best thing we can build within your budget? And then you're fairly good to go. But of course, some things, there's every now and then there's a product that just is either very complex or provides no value if not built entirely. It happens. And in that case, unfortunately, it can even be more expensive than that.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, so if you're using the analogy of building a house, right? It's like, instead of saying, hey, here's my land, build a house, you're like, okay, this is the square footage I want this many rooms. And then now the price becomes like, do you want granite counters? Do you want hardwood floors? Like, that's going to be a big difference in your pricing, right? So yeah, I think it's all those little details that it could quickly add up, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm thinking okay, I want to start hiring, I'm ready to go and hire some people. Is there any, favorite recommended platforms or where you recommend, finding trustworthy, qualified remote developers? And, obviously Upwork, and there's a couple of others. Any others you like?
Yeah, totally. So what we see a lot is that, firstly and foremost, I think it's important to mention that a lot of people get find their developers through recommendations. One of the best ways, a buddy who's built a SaaS, you ask in a group who's used developers, and you get like actual recommendations of people who've built things, and that is always a very good indicator. There's just one risk with that, is that your project may be slightly different, and so whoever is a good fit was a good fit for a certain person doesn't have to be a good fit for you, because there's a lot of differences between agencies and people like that. Now, you mentioned Upwork, and there's also Clutch. They're platforms where you obviously have a lot of user recommendations as well. You can filter, and you have a huge choice, and that is also very valuable. You do have a bit of work with that. You have to look through and kind of make that decision. And the last ones are companies like us. There's also a few, we're not the only ones, who work with I'd say much smaller pool of companies, but we provide like this individual one-on-one help where we say, got it. Yep, this is exactly who you should be working with.
Got it. And if I'm, let's say I'm further down along, I've built some kind of, have a working product, I've got some sales, we got revenue, and I'm just trying to understand, okay, like I built this company, but I don't know how well my team levels and the skill of my, that they have and the speed of their execution. How should they maybe think about some questions they should ask themselves, or what should they be looking at and say, okay, wait, maybe I actually need to change or replace my entire dev team that they currently have, or maybe what they've actually built is spaghetti code, or what I have isn't good enough, and my dev team isn't doing as good as I would like to in order to scale. And then what are the risks of doing that? Like, let's say being in the middle phase of a project here.
Yeah, that's very common. So as I said, right, a lot of people come to us when they feel they have a problem with their team. Right. And so this is we have lots of cases like that. And to be frank, it's never completely smooth sailing. Like, bugs are actually a normal part of software development. Estimations, actually, some people decide to never do them again because they just can be flawed. That's also a thing that you can completely get rid of. But what is too much, right? What is just completely too much? There's a fine line, and once you cross it, like, you actually have a terrible dev team. So if you're like constantly firefighting, like if you're being on calls explaining things all the time instead of growing your business, or you constant deadline overruns, like multiples of your estimations without exception. If your app is slow, is buggy, people are complaining, and the end result is like you have churn, that's kind of like a terrible sign. And so most of the time this is with the small MVP builds, and you kind of outgrow your agency, which happens a lot. Then you need to level up, find a solid team. They will most likely need to refactor or even rewrite. Like, it depends. You always hope they can refactor. Sometimes that's not possible. But you then need to find someone who is good at that. obviously, if you have any doubt, if you don't know, like we do code reviews, we look at things, we try to get to the bottom of this. We regularly tell people that, I think you might have to hire a product manager because you're not collaborating completely well with the team, and there's maybe some fault with you as well. So we really try to be honest here and help you before, upselling whatever we do. Because it does happen, right? It does happen that someone is not very involved and they're completely all over the place, right? Today they want to build this, tomorrow they want to build something else. Then a user writes a support ticket and you're like completely 180 degrees changing your plans again. Things like that happen, and then you're dragging everybody along with you without clear guidance. So sometimes you also need to understand if that is happening. But again, a lot of times you also just need to level up, understand when is the right time to get a more professional process going, have better tech leadership, and just, have a team that does what they're supposed to do and does it well.
Okay. So sometimes it's not actually, would you say sometimes it's not the issue of the developers or the product? Sometimes it could be like the management itself, right? That just not,
Sometimes, yeah, of course. It could be anyone's. I don't want to say fault because it's a very
sure, it's all learning, right? I mean, it's not that fun, easy to
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But it happens, right? It does happen, and we want to educate people as much as we can. And you also asked, I forgot to answer that question, like the risk of doing that in the middle of a project, right? It always comes with a massive learning curve. So you're going to have a delay either way. Sometimes it's just not worth switching in the middle of a release, especially if you find out that you need to rewrite this thing. So sometimes it just might, you might want to finish some crucial parts and then rewrite. Because sometimes you just don't have a choice. Unfortunately, and it is kind of sad, but this is reality currently, is that a lot of very good people, they won't even bother with a bad code base. So even though it might not make a lot of business sense to rewrite because you're not actually, like, maybe the users aren't even that impacted. Like maybe you'd need to rewrite in a year anyway, but not now. It makes more sense then from a business perspective. Very often, because people are so in demand, a lot of good people, and we see it on a daily basis, will simply say, I won't work on this. Like, I can rewrite it. It's not a problem, but I won't work on this.
I've seen that several times. Yeah. They just look at a code like, I'm not this, I'm out. I'm not doing this.
Exactly. And that's a real problem. And a reason why to kind of try to get this sorted as early as possible, not when it's like way too late. Again, I do firmly believe that scrappy MVPs are the right way to start things. There's no point in investing a lot of money before something is validated. But it's very tricky to then realize when the right point is without delaying things too much and without going too far into this for it to become a major, major business risk, to rewrite at the right point and then just be set up well with good developers who are happy to work on your code base.
Exactly. I think that's the same with, you said having a good CTO or good CMO. It's not just like, yes, they are a cost and obviously they're not cheap, but what happens is like, they're going to save you a lot of money by making sure you avoid a lot of things, right? And that's most, I think, is like being able to look at and say, look, don't spend your money on all this that you thought was good marketing and is going to give you results, but they have experience, or, don't invest in this type of code, or don't bother with this because we've seen that, it's just going to cost you more and it's not worth the result of it, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Cool. This has been great, Victor. Really, really helpful. I think a lot of good insights for people listening in and thinking about how to hire developers, manage them, and where to look. So I want to move, kind of shift gears towards the more rapid fire, the fun part of the interview. Are you ready to go there?
Ready.
Ready? All right, cool. All right, Victor, what is one activity you enjoy outside of work that gets you into flow state?
Most probably driving. I kind of love driving. I don't know why I have to do it a lot because I travel a lot for work.
Cool.
But I just usually listen to podcasts. I'll add yours now, of course. And,
Thank you.
It's just like hours go by. I don't know why. It's kind of, some people hate it.
Like driving, are you just like cruising, or are you like speeding down and you got a race car?
Unfortunately, I don't have a race car. We're not that far yet, but in Germany we don't have a speed limit, so we can't push things sometimes.
That's awesome. Cool. What's one piece of advice you wish you had known and would tell your 25-year-old self?
That's not that long ago. Right? I'm 28 right now. But I'd probably say just keep grinding. It's really what I would tell my 18-year-old self. Like, that's it might not look like it, but you just keep going. You'll figure it out. That's good advice, I think.
Nice. Persistence. Yeah.
Totally.
What are some of the biggest challenges you're currently facing in order to continue to grow Trustshoring? Meaning, what keeps you up at night these days?
There's something literally keeping me up at night that has to do with scaling, and it's the consulting part, which I absolutely love. Right, it's becoming quite a lot. So we're especially now. So I live in Europe, right, and we have a lot of clients in the US, and now Australia started popping onto the map. And so there are days where I get up, I get on calls at like 7 a.m. and finish them at midnight. And that's a scaling issue because I have a team for almost everything, but kind of one-on-one consulting is what I do. And pretty much exclusively at this point. That's all I do. But it's hard for me to give that up somehow. And I know it's not really wise in a business sense, but I just love doing it. I love helping people.
Yeah. How do you replace yourself, right? It's always a challenge. You need to, that's the next outsourcing agency you should build. How to replace yourself, right?
Totally. I'll outsource myself. Anyway. Well, our entire team is built. These are not developers because we're not a dev shop, right? We're a consulting company, but we're our entire team is just built how I would hire a developer. So we're completely remote. We're all over Eastern Europe, and one person is in Portugal, and that's really something that we live, right? This culture.
Yeah. We've been the same ever since day one. So yeah, that's the only way I'd like to do it.
Totally.
Cool. Who or what are some of the best resources? These can be, books, mentors, or people you follow in the space who you'd say have been the most instrumental to your success over these last few years.
So, for the past years, and I think what really made a difference to my business and is there's definitely three people I can think of. Let me see. So the first one would be Stelly FD from Close.io. Probably doesn't remember when I once picked him up from the airport in Berlin and just asked him for business advice when I was like 20 years older or something. But he literally, he said, what you're doing is wrong. You should do this, 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 and this, because that's what people want. And then I did that. And so that's really cool. And so he gave very early advice. And also Rob Walling from Startups for the Rest of Us, Microconf, Tiny Seed. He's who got me into SaaS. So that's why we do SaaS, why we work with SaaS, for SaaS. I'd love to buy SaaS at some point. So I started listening to Startups for the Rest of Us probably a decade ago. Is it that old? I think it is. It's something around that. Yeah. And I've been going to Microcon for probably 7 years now, something like that. So this is really, really someone who inspired me. And obviously, my wife who has a brilliant mind and she's always ready to jump on any challenge I come home with. So without her, also this wouldn't exist.
Awesome. That's great. Love it. Victor, what does success mean to you today? How do you measure it? Whether it's personally, business, financial, life? It's no right answer.
So success, I guess personal has always been being able to control my life, how I want to live it, without being able to make decisions without substantial sacrifice. Like I move around a lot, travel a lot, spend a lot of time in various places without having, to look for a new job or, now whatever the problems are if you do that. So this is really personal success that I'm able to do it. Professionally, I would say, this particular company is 6 years old now. And last year, the year before, kind of the first people whom I helped in the early days, and they were also in their early stages, right? Developing MVPs or now starting to hire better people. They started announcing like one after the other their acquisitions for like substantial amounts of money. And a lot of people reached out to me and thanked me personally for that, like saying that would be possible without our help. And that is really professional success for me. That means a lot to me.
Wow. So being part of that kind of success that you see the other people, changing their lives as well. So love it.
Yeah, totally. Even though you'd say, they might have forgotten about us. It's been a long time ago. We do actually stay in touch with a lot of people. That's what we do. We try to understand how we can help them along the way. But still, it's cool that even such a small thing can have an impact down the road.
Yeah, 100%. Well, this has been great, Victor. Really, really appreciate you jumping on SaaS District and sharing all your insights. Where can founders listening in get in touch with you, learn more about you, just want to say hi or learn more about your company?
Yeah, totally. So if any of this was interesting for you and you want to like dive in deeper specifically about building products like UX and product management and remote work, software development, these kind of things, I host a podcast called Product Stories, where we interview like experts in exactly these fields. And you can find it on our site. It's trustshoring.com, trust, TRUST, shoring, SHORING.com. And also, you mentioned it, our Complete Outsourcing Playbook, which guides you through our process of finding the right software house. But this one doesn't include like hiring people directly. This one is specific for software houses. So if you consider software houses, that is exactly a thing you should read. But obviously there's also just hiring people directly. And that's something we do as well through recruiting.
And where can
obviously
people
you can find me on LinkedIn. It's on our site as well.
Okay, perfect. We'll put a link. And we'll also add your LinkedIn. Is that the best place to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. LinkedIn, email. I'm always happy to chat. And I'm also always happy. Some people just call me up to ask if they should build something or how much that could cost or not. And then we just also give tips without any business transaction. Like I like helping founders.
Awesome. Really, really appreciate you and what you're doing in this space, Victor.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Cheers. Thank you. Thank you all for watching this episode and joining SaaS District today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for future episodes where we interview top leaders in the SaaS industry. If you're a SaaS company looking to grow and unlock the true value of your business, get in touch with us at Horizon Capital, and myself or one of our consultants will provide a free assessment to help you get there and hit your goals. If you have any feedback or suggestions for this podcast, please comment down below and help us improve our content for you all. Thanks again and see you on the next one.